join me in welcoming Lance Berberian. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and I really appreciate you taking your evening to come and hear me speak about LabCorp and healthcare and some of the things we're doing to really transform our industry. In order to begin, and I know we touched on a couple of the places that I've worked, I'm a serial health IT guy. That's where I've spent my career. I started out in electronic data systems, which is a huge consulting company, but I was in their healthcare and life sciences practice, which allowed me to see a lot of different companies, whether they were pharmaceutical companies or healthcare companies. And then I went to Quest Diagnostics, and it's okay for everyone to boo when I say that, because they're the hated enemy of LabCorp. They're our biggest competitor. And when I left there in 1997, I was their chief information officer. After I was their chief information, I've been a chief information officer for 23 years. Could you imagine? It's a great job. So then I went to a company called Interim Healthcare. It's a home healthcare provider. So we paid about 80,000 nurses a year to go into the homes of people who were sick or elderly to take care of them. I had a brief stint outside of healthcare, but missed healthcare, so I joined IDEX Laboratories. Has anyone heard of IDEX Laboratories? IDEX Laboratories is like LabCorp for veterinarians. If you take your dog or cat or bird or snake or whatever it is that you have to your veterinarian and they draw their blood, they're likely to send it to IDEX Laboratories, who will process that blood in the same way that LabCorp does and send the results back to the veterinarian. I joined LabCorp about 5 years ago. If you think of my role as the Chief Information Officer, I have all of the standard responsibilities you would expect. It's all of the infrastructure like networks and data centers and all of the sort of technology within the company. It's also all the computer systems that all of our employees use. They could be laboratory systems or billing systems or finance or HR systems. But along with that, I have a few things that are sort of an exception. I am responsible for all of our product development. We have a tremendous amount of custom software development that's delivered to our customers for their use. That might be a physician, it might be a consumer who had their lab testing done. It could be a hospital or a payer like United Healthcare or Aetna or Cigna. It could be a pharmaceutical company. So all of those entities receive software from us that makes their lives easier. Sometimes we do it because it gets them to send us business, like lab testing business. Sometimes we actually charge them for the software, depending upon what the system does. I'm also responsible for our robotics. Does anybody here have exposure to robotics? Okay, so it sounds like there's some people. So you'll get sort of an interesting perspective on some of the things that we do with robots within LabCorp. I also have a team called bioinformatics. The guy who leads that team describes his people as like flying fish, because they're a weird mix. They're sort of half biologists and half IT people. They code in Java, but they know what DNA means, right? They look at biomarkers, but they're analytics, big data people, right? They're likely to have data science back. The guy who runs it has his PhD from Yale in artificial intelligence, but he is as likely to know about biology as that. So we have a fairly large bioinformatics team that's important to our company, as you could imagine, given what we do. So in order for you to understand where we've invested in technology and why we've picked those things, it's important for you to get a sense for our company, because it's a little bit misleading because you hear the name LabCorp and you think, wow, I know what that is. But we suffer from something that, if you remember when there was Google, and Google owned Google, and they owned a bunch of other companies. And ultimately they renamed the parent company to Alphabet, right? And you can think of that as, remember Coach, like the handbag company? And then they bought a whole bunch of companies, but the parent was Coach, and they owned a whole bunch of companies, and then they changed the parent name to Tapestry. So we are LabCorp, and I am the CIO of the parent company, and we own Core Diagnostics, but we also own another company called Covance, right? And the acquisition of Covance transformed our company, and it points us in a direction. Our now mission, our North Star for us, is different than it was before because we believe the combination of the companies is going to transform healthcare as we see it today. So what Covance does is a drug development company. They are focused on working with pharmaceutical companies to bring drugs to market. And I'll get more specific about what they do and why it's important from a technology standpoint. But what's important for you to understand is the mission of the company. We have an important mission that affects many people. We will improve health and improve lives, and we will do it by 3 ways. We are going to focus on world-class diagnostics. We are going to bring innovative medicines to patients who need them sooner. And we're going to use technology to improve the delivery of care. That is what we are about. That is the mission. And everything I talk about today, I hope when you leave here, you're going to say all that stuff connects back to those 3 things. So like I said, we're LabCorp Diagnostics. We offer 5,000 different tests. Some of them are basic tests. They're routine tests. They're a cholesterol test. That's an easy one. We also offer very hard, complex tests. We are the leader in the industry in something called the NIPT test. If you're a pregnant mom and you're at risk of having a child with a developmental disorder like Down syndrome, the standard of care is you take a really long needle and you stick that needle into the woman's stomach, into the amniotic sac right next to the baby, and you draw out some fluid and you test it. I don't know about you, but that sounds really scary to me. LabCorp is the leader in something called the NIPT test. That's the non-invasive prenatal test. You simply draw the mother's blood out of her arm. You look at the DNA circulating in the blood. You'll find a lot of one kind of DNA and a little bit of another kind of DNA. That little bit is the baby's DNA, and then you test it. That's non-invasive prenatal testing. So it gets as simple as a cholesterol test and as interesting and complex as genetic testing and advanced testing. And we do that with 700 PhDs and MDs because a lot of it is the talent. We also do it with courier drivers who drive around and pick up at all of our customers because you have to pick up those samples. We have patient service centers where you can get your blood drawn, 1,850 of them, and a lot of phlebotomists. I'm going to use the term phlebotomist a lot today, so that's the person who draws your blood or collects your specimen, right? So we have 11,500 phlebotomists. Some of them are in those 1,850 locations, and some of them are in doctors' offices. Like I said, we're also now that second company, the drug development company. So when a pharmaceutical company invents a new drug, you know what the first thing they do is? They patent it, because they don't want anyone else to take it away from them. But here's the problem. You invent a new drug and you patent it, you can't sell it. You can't sell it until the FDA allows you to sell it in the United States, and there is an equivalent of the FDA in every other country. And you have to get it approved by those entities. And that begins with preclinical testing. Those are the words for testing it on animals before you test it on people. Then you enter phase 1. Phase 1 has a nickname. It's called first in human. So you put people, generally men, in hospital beds, and you put the pharmaceutical in their body for the very first time in very small quantities, and you increase those quantities over time, monitoring that person, checking their vitals, checking their diagnostic test results to make sure there's no adverse effects. Because these people don't even have the disease that the drug treats. You're just looking to see if there's any adverse effects. We do that. We have a 300-bed hospital in Dallas. We have them in England. We have these facilities to test that first-in-human trial to make sure there aren't adverse effects. If you pass that test, you get to go to phase 2. Phase 2 is now giving it to a small population of people that actually have the disease. Now, it's a small population because it's risky. It's the first time you're really applying it in this manner. If it passes that, if the FDA will let you go to phase 3, that's a larger population. At the end of phase 3, if the FDA approves your submission, you get to sell that drug. Phase 4 is when you learn later that it might actually be used for other things. I'm going to talk today about a drug called Keytruda. Keytruda is an important drug. It's for non-small cell lung cancer. But guess what? After it was in the market, they realized it also treats melanoma. So that's another indication for that drug that would be considered a phase 4 indication. All throughout this process, you're doing laboratory testing on those people going through the trial for every phase. So at Covance, we do the preclinical testing. We do phase 1, 2, 3, 4. We do all of the laboratory testing across those phases. And we also use something called real-world evidence to try to expedite the trials. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit later about that. LabCorp is a growing company. The blue is Core Diagnostics, the orange is Covance, and you can see that we will finish last year at about $11.3 billion in sales. Our earnings per share increases on a consistent basis. That means profitability, right? Earnings per share. So it's revenue and profitability growth. And one of the things I like the most is we invest in technology. So if you look at our capital expenses from 2014 to 18, 46% of our capital investments went into IT. So now that I've explained what the company does, both parts, I want to talk to you about some of the innovation that we do that supports our mission across those two companies. We all know from hearing on the news, and maybe experiencing it yourself, that healthcare is a problem in our country. And part of it is controlling the cost, and part of it is providing better care at that controlled cost. So at Core Diagnostics, we are focused on improving the quality of care and managing to lower the cost of care as well. We are also focused on enhancing the consumer experience, because what we are learning is as people have to pay more of their healthcare bill, they start to ask questions. They start to care about who's providing the healthcare, and why do I need that test, and why don't I need that other test over here, right? And plus, if you think about it, in my parents' age, the doctor was a god and you did what they said. At my age, I might be very polite and ask some questions. At your age, you really want to know what's going on, right? So the culture of interacting with the doctor is shifting over time, and it's partially because people have to pay most of it out of their pocket. So we provide a tool to physicians. It's called LabCorp Link. It's an app. It's a responsive app, so it works on a cell phone, tablet, computer, and it gives that physician an enhanced view of laboratory data. They can place an order for laboratory work, but they can review the results and do a variety of other activities that support that physician's efforts. Now, if you think about a lab result, an enhanced view becomes important. For example, in a lot of tests, the lab result has a reference range that goes along with it. It basically says, if you take the large majority of people, there's sort of a high value and a low value you should be in between, sort of like your cholesterol test. Now imagine a physician meets a patient, runs the test, and it determines that that person's cholesterol is pretty high in the range, but it's in the range, but it's pretty high. Is that good or bad? I don't know. Because if the last time they had a cholesterol test, it was way high, outside of the range, then that doctor should be saying to the patient, great job. You really have been improving the way you're eating and exercising and lowering your cholesterol. If the last time the test was in the middle of the range, well, then we have a problem. We have to have a conversation about less McDonald's, right? So things like being able to chart that result over time allows that physician to have that enhanced view and interact with that patient in a more value-added way. We also provide enhanced reporting to the physicians. In the old days in the lab business, you sent the data. What we want to send is the insights that cause that patient to be treated better, improve care. It also makes the physician more efficient. So being able to share those insights through an enhanced test report is an important part of what we are doing. We also invented something that is a clinical decision support system. And I'm very proud to say a couple weeks ago, we got the patent on this particular technology. And actually, the key inventor is in the back room over there. Anna, why don't you just, there you go. So this is a key piece of technology comprised of two main components. One of them is MDSL, Medical Domain Specific Language. This is a language that lets a clinician author rules so that you don't have to have programmers write code to create the rules. Then those MDSL rules get inserted into a high-speed rules engine. I would almost describe the rules engine, which is called the matrix, as if you think of a Rubik's Cube, except every square of the Rubik's Cube can also be a Rubik's Cube. So instead of having a billion if-then statements or case statements, you're able to drill through the path to produce the result. And the result of this report is not just the lab test results, but true guidance to the physician on how to treat the patient. And we do that across a variety of disease states like chronic kidney disease and diabetes. So these are all ways to help the doctor understand, based on a complex rule set that involves lab values and non-lab values, what they can do to improve care for the patient. As you can imagine, in the healthcare ecosystem, everything is very large. LabCorp is an at-scale company, right? We're doing 500 million tests a year. Well, you can't type anything. It's just too high a volume. So we do a lot of Edi Connectivity. And you can think of that as you go to the hospital or you go to a doctor's office, they put that lab order into their computer system, but it gets transmitted to us. So we receive it electronically, and when we produce the results, same thing. It flows back through the path into their medical record so that the doctor can see it inside their computer system. They may want that enhanced view of the app that I showed you earlier, but at least in the medical record of their core system, they have those test results. And we build between 8,000 and 10,000 of those EDI connections every year. We have 67,000 of them running every single day to get data in the company and out of the company. One of the powerful things about LabCorp coming together with Covance is the idea of health systems being used for clinical trials. We know that the pharmaceutical company wants to compress the time frame of the trial because, as I said earlier, they patent that molecule as soon as they invent it. And every day they're spending in the clinical trial is consuming time that they would have patent coverage during sales. And let me quantify that for a second. I'm going to go back to Keytruda. Peak sales for Keytruda only for the non-small cell lung cancer indication is $6 billion a year. I like that because I'm not good at math, and $6 billion a year is easy to figure out. It's $500 million a month. Every month you delay the clinical trials, they lose $500 million in sales under patent coverage. Well, LabCorp has great relationships with health systems and hospitals. And health systems and hospitals love to participate in clinical trials. It's very prestigious, and it's a revenue source. So can't LabCorp and Covance coordinate to help the pharmaceutical companies, help the health systems, and most importantly, help that patient who needs the drug when it's not yet approved by the FDA to expedite the process to get those drugs to the patients who need them. To me, this is a winner all around. In a company like ours that's an at-scale company, what you'll find, and this is a common question that people ask me as a CIO, Lance, when do you buy software and when do you build software? It's an interesting question. My thought is that if you can't find it in the market to buy and it's a differentiator for the company, you need to build it. And in a company that does the specific thing that we do, there are certain examples where for our internal employee use systems and for products that we're developing to give to customers, we need to build software from scratch. And we know that it's important to leverage a modern tech stack. So this is where we are focusing on integrating cloud computing with on-premise computing, microservices, and then we are layering that on top of hyper-converged computing in our data centers combined with those cloud-based services in Amazon and other cloud-based services. And we've integrated into it a big data platform because a lot of the capabilities that we provide to customers and use internally are based on the huge amount of data that is the natural exhaust that comes off of the laboratory testing that we do. All of that data can be used for statistical analysis, for serving patients, for serving physicians, and all of that is integrated into a modern platform. And when I talk about that big data platform, this is very important to a laboratory or a healthcare company like us because of the value of our data. And we ingest that data from all of our core systems, surface it in our data lake, our Hadoop-based data lake, and then a lot of that data is pumped into our HANA platform, which is an in-memory computing platform. So if you think of the orders of magnitude faster memory is accessed compared to disk drives, by pumping that data up into that HANA platform, it gives us extraordinary performance when accessing that data. And we do that for simple things like reporting, but we do that for advanced things like data sciences and other capabilities that we offer. We also have a system called AccuDraw. AccuDraw is a system that makes sure that when the phlebotomist is collecting your specimen, that they're doing it correctly. Now, how many people have had blood draw? And how many of you have wondered, why do they need so much blood? They always walk away with like a handful of these tubes, right? Well, the answer is that each of those tubes is different. And you can tell because the color of the top is different, right? So if you get one drawn into what's called a lavender top, that has a chemical in it called EDTA. EDTA is an anti-clotting agent. So if they're going to do a blood cell count, they don't want your blood to clot. So they'll draw that into a lavender top tube. Probably the most common tube is called a speckle top tube. I call it that. It's also called a serum separator tube, right? Because the most common type of specimen used in a laboratory is serum. It's used in chemistry, it's used in serology, it's used in special chemistry, it's used all throughout the lab. Because if you take your blood and you put it in one of those speckle top tubes, you'll notice, watch the doctor when they do it, it's got this gooey stuff in the tube. Looks like almost Vaseline or something. They're going to take that tube, they're going to stick it into a centrifuge, and they're going to spin it at about 10,000 RPM. And when they take it out of the centrifuge, it's going to be 3 stripes. A dark red stripe at the bottom, that's all your red and white blood cells. It's going to be the goo separator, and then it's going to have this yellowish liquid on the top that is your serum. And that's where all the chemicals in your blood are suspended. Your cholesterol is a chemical that is suspended in serum. It's a very common substance that is used throughout the laboratory. Well, if you think of that phlebotomist drawing your blood, they need to draw the correct amount into each type of tube to accommodate all of your tests, and then they need to treat the tubes correctly, meaning sometimes they're refrigerated, sometimes they're frozen, sometimes they're ambient, right? Well, okay, got to get that all right. And what if they get it wrong? guess who's going back to get another needle stuck in their arm? You're not going to be happy about that, right? So this guides that phlebotomist to collect the correct amount of specimen in the correct containers to serve your entire lab order. Again, improve the quality of care and improve the cost of care and serve the patient, serve the consumer. So I spent a little extra time on what is serum for a reason. I mentioned before that we're involved with robotics. It's an important part of what we do. We design and build robots from the ground up, not buy them and install them in the lab. We do some of that too, but for key robots, we design the hardware, software, build it, and implement it in our labs. If you were to guess, how big is a robot? Size of a refrigerator? Okay, we have a kind of robot that's in 6 of our labs called Propel. And by the way, we make a variety of types of robots. But Propel is 7,000 square feet for one of them. 7,000 square feet. It does serum preparation in 250,000 test tubes in an 8-hour shift. Sometimes when I say this, people don't believe me, so let's take a look. So it's grabbing those tubes, and now it's going to dump that serum off the top of the tube like I described to you after it was centrifuged. All of this, again, designed and built by LabCorp. Notice how it's printing the barcode labels on the... It has to do that in flight. You can't put a label on as fast as these things go. So we buy them with a blank label and barcode print them as they're going through the robot. See how it's sealing, capping the specimen to preserve the integrity when it's going into storage? At some point, what you're going to see it pan across and you'll get the full sense of the size of the robot. See it over there? That whole thing is the robot. That is all 100% designed, built, software, hardware, managed through cloud computing by LabCorp. So I mentioned a little bit earlier the NIPT test, which was a genetic test. LabCorp is a leader in genetic testing. Now, I don't know how many of you have taken how many of you here have taken biology? So you've probably learned something about DNA. So every living thing has DNA. You have DNA in every cell in your body, right? And if I took the DNA out of one cell of your body and I stretched it out, it would be that long. That long from one cell. It's all curled up. It has 3.2 billion data points, right? Because we all know DNA is like shaped like a ladder that you twisted, right? Double helix. At every rung, there is a piece of data. Because there's a chemical, adenine, guanine, cytosine. So it's either an A, a C, a T, or a G. At every point of the rung of the ladder is an A, a C, a T, or a G. So now if you think about it, DNA is completely an IT problem, right? You have 3.2 billion things that are either A's, T's, and G's, and the pattern gives me my bald spot, gives me my height, gives me everything about me is all coming from my DNA. I got half of it from my dad. I got half of it from my mom, right? Knowing that is important because you inherit things because of it. Those variants cause things about your health. Does anybody remember when Angelina Jolie had a prophylactic double mastectomy, right? Why? Because she had a variant in her DNA. She had the BRCA variant. 3% of women in the United States get breast cancer. If you have the BRCA variant, 54% of women get breast cancer. This is important stuff. So We do genetic testing. It's called, the first type we do is called germline testing. That's a fancy way of saying, what did you get from your mom and dad? What is your inheritance? The second type of testing we do is oncology testing. Because if you think about it, cancer is mutated DNA. If you can know the specific mutation, you can prescribe the drug better, right? So knowing that particular variant means you have to sequence the DNA of the cancer. We also sometimes are looking for the DNA of something that's in your body. So you're not looking for the patient's DNA or cancer DNA. You might be looking at HIV virus DNA because the specific type of HIV, that strain of HIV that you can recognize from the DNA, is better treated by one drug or another. And the fourth reason that we do genetic testing is for identity. Right? You watch those crime scene shows and you're trying to figure out who somebody is, right? That's identity. A lot of times we're doing identity because the mom is saying he's the dad's saying I'm not the dad, and you have to test and figure out based on the child's and the father's if it is, right? That's another reason you do identity. Little known fact, LabCorp is one of the last large users of Polaroid film. Remember the film that you had to go like that? The reason is because in many cases, by law, you have to have a Polaroid of the dad with a needle in his arm to make sure that it ties back through the chain of custody. Interesting piece of trivia. So I talked a little bit before, patients are consumers in today's day and age of healthcare. They get to decide stuff, they want to decide stuff, they want to know more and have more control over their healthcare. So what are we doing? For one thing, we've started to produce a patient cost estimate so people are not surprised after receiving their healthcare services from LabCorp about how much they're going to get charged. That's common in healthcare in the United States today. You don't know. Your insurance company does something, and then eventually you get a bill for some amount. We would like to inform patients up front we think it's the right thing to do. We're creating patient-friendly test reports. We talked earlier about the physician-friendly test reports, but if you're a patient, you might likely want to see what your test results are in a way that you can understand them and consume the information. We're starting to put LabCorp blood draw stations in Walgreens locations. Consumers love this, right? Especially since we have a feature to send you a text when it's time to get your blood draw. So now you show up, instead of sitting there waiting, you can go wander around Walgreens. It's good for Walgreens, good for the consumer, good for us, and I'll tell you, the consumers actually rate this as a fantastic thing. We have them in about 20 stores as the pilot, and we're now identifying 600 more. We're releasing Pixel by LabCorp. Pixel is a test kit that you can buy, and you can lancet your finger, put your blood in it, snap it shut, send it to LabCorp, and we'll run the test off that device. Again, very consumer-oriented.
We value your time and want to provide the most efficient experience before, during, and after your visit to our service centers. We've made it easier to schedule your visit in advance to reduce your wait time. LabCorp PreCheck provides a fast, easy, and secure way to schedule a visit to a LabCorp service center. Find your nearest or preferred location to schedule your visit, then answer a few questions, and you're set. Our system will then remember your information to save you time when scheduling future visits with PreCheck. Say goodbye to completing forms on clipboards. When you arrive for your visit, the LabCorp Express Station provides a quick, self-guided check-in process. All you need is the QR code sent to your device, your driver's license, or a state-issued ID. The LabCorp Express Station also provides an easy way to make a payment. After your visit, sign into or activate your LabCorp patient account. It's an easy way to securely view your lab results, pay your bill, schedule your next visit, and more from any device. We look forward to providing you with a prompt and reliable experience. Improving health, improving lives.
Very consumer focused, but let me tell you, couldn't do it without technology. Do you know how many thousands of different insurance cards they are? When you looked at that iPad tablet and that had that little tray that you drop your driver's license onto and your insurance card onto, we're stopping the patient from having to hammer all that information in. When they drop their driver's license on, it's going to snap a picture of that driver's license, suck it up into the AWS cloud. It's going to apply machine learning algorithms to identify the specific card type, which is going to allow us to rip the data off it using OCR and pump it into the system and present it back to the person so they don't have to type anything. And then when they do it with the insurance card, we do the same and follow it with a real-time call to the payer, whether it's Aetna or Cigna or Humana or Medicare or Medicaid, to say, does this person have coverage and what kind? And we present that information back to the patient. So it's elegant for the consumer, but it's based on the work that the IT team did to add the sophistication on the back end of that process. So now I want to spend a little time on that other piece, right? This is the piece where we're trying to focus on getting the drugs to market faster. Now the trick to this is we have to improve the trials using real-world evidence. I want to talk to you about something called companion diagnostics, and as well some targeted software that we provide to pharmaceutical companies. The trick to expediting the trial and shrinking the time frame so that the drug to market comes quicker is three things have to come together. There is a protocol. The protocol says the inclusion-exclusion criteria. For a patient to participate in this trial, they need to have these lab values. There needs to be a certain number of them that are men and women. There needs to be a certain percentage for each race. There needs to be, they might have to have a BMI over a certain amount or a blood pressure, or all these facts that cause you to say, these people can be part of the trial. Now you can imagine if you design that protocol too restrictive, you'll never be able to find the patients fast enough. So knowing how to design that protocol becomes very important to actually recruiting the patients into the trial. Then there's a matter of identifying where are these patients. And hopefully you have clusters of patients around doctors that will operate the trial. Right? They're called investigators. A doctor that participates in a trial is called an investigator in clinical trials. So you really want to find the investigators and sites that are near patients that fit the protocol. Now you can imagine, here we are, LabCorp, doing 500,000 patient orders a day that have diagnosis codes on them, that have dates of birth on them, that have genders on them, that have tests and test results associated with them. This is important stuff. So let me give you an example. Take an ulcerative colitis trial. This is an actual trial. We look in our LabCorp database and we find about 52,000 patients that are ulcerative colitis diagnosis code. You then start to apply the inclusion-exclusion criteria, and you end up, this is a true trial, you end up with a screen fail rate of about 75%. Okay, so now we no longer have that massive number of patients we can go pursue. We have a smaller number that meet all of the criteria that make up the inclusion-exclusion criteria of a trial. Okay, so let's geolocate those patients and plot them on a heat map. But remember, there's more to it than just finding the patients, because you still have that thing about the sites. So okay, we know about sites because we do clinical trials. So we know which doctors are good at which disease states for clinical trials, and we also know how many they're running right now, because you sort of don't want to pick a doctor that's really busy doing a ton of different trials because they can't give yours the attention. So in the end, we're able to take the location of the patients and the location of the doctors that are good at those clinical trials and find the clusters where we need to recruit patients into the trial. Again, all for the purpose of getting that drug out to market and into the patients that really need, in many cases, a life-saving drug. So now I'm going to talk to you for a second about companion diagnostics, another place that's a heavy intersection point between the two companies. Obviously, LabCorp is good at doing lab tests and designing lab tests and knows all about laboratory testing. Well, it turns out that some drugs are very good in some cases, but not in others, depending upon a laboratory test. So I'm back to Keytruda. Keytruda for non-small cell lung cancer. But Keytruda works because of very specific interaction. In every one of your bodies, you are born with a type of cell that fights cancer. Did you know that? It's called a T cell. T cells fight cancer. Here's the problem. Also in your body, you have a mechanism to tell the T cell not to kill a cell. You sort of have to have that because there's sometimes in your body a type of cell that's not normally in your body, but it's a good thing. Think of a pregnant mom. You don't want the T cells to kill the foreign object. There has to be a way for that kind of cell to say to the T cell, don't kill me, I'm good. And that's called the PD-1-PDL1 interaction, okay? It stands for Programmed Death Ligand 1. It's the way to say, don't kill me to the T cell. Well, it happens that some cancer learns that trick and is able to say to the T cells, don't kill me. And what Keytruda does is it reinvigorates the T cells so your T cells don't fall for the trick, basically. Now, when you do the trial in a case like this, you create what's called this companion diagnostic, and you say, I'm only going to include people in the trial that have this test result when I ran the test. That means it becomes a lot more effective because you're not using the drug on people where it's not going to work because it's not using that PDL1 interaction. So it improves the effectivity during the trial, but of course, what will the FDA say? Of course. If you did the test to limit the people coming into the trial, you have to do the test when you prescribe the drug. So it becomes on label for the drug. So let's think about that. LabCorp Diagnostics can help the pharmaceutical company come up with the companion diagnostic that is going to make that trial successful. It then can commercialize the test to make it available for people to use it. It can make sure that drug that might have failed the trial without the companion diagnostic comes to market and saves the lives of those people with non-small cell lung cancer because of the combination of the companion diagnostic and the drug. We also provide very specific solutions to pharmaceutical companies that are differentiating. We're not trying to be the primary software vendor for pharmaceutical companies, but when we look at the process that pharmaceutical companies go through, we see areas that are focused, that can be addressed with software that we deliver to customers, and we sell that to the pharmaceutical companies. So you might think of something like PharmaQuity. PharmaQuity is a product that helps the customer design the trial for success. What countries should I run it in, right? In the European Union, there's a lot of countries. Which one is most likely to have a short and efficient and successful trial? How can I design the protocol? What is the forecast? If I ran the trial with this protocol, when is it likely to end? And can I tweak the parameters to make it a more successful trial? We have a product called Endpoint. Now, when you do a clinical trial, generally it's a double-blind trial. There are exceptions for oncology and others, but generally it's a double-blind trial. What that means is some people are on the drug and some people are on a placebo. Because in the end, the FDA is going to want to compare those two populations and see, did the people taking the drug do better than the people taking the placebo? Well, something has to determine, did this patient meet the inclusion-exclusion criteria? Then which ones are going to get the placebo? Which ones are going to get the drug? and then manage the shipment of the correct material to the correct physician so that you have a person consistently throughout the trial either on the drug or the placebo. And that's what that piece of software does. The Accelerate platform is an actual automation platform that helps the trial during the period of the trial. It does things like risk monitoring. Are the sites handling the trial correctly? Are the patients at any sort of risk? And by doing that, it helps to sort of ensure the success of the trial by using technology. And the fourth one, Global Specimen Solutions, is basically a way for the pharmaceutical company, the patient, the physician, and the lab to share data in a way that optimizes the flow of laboratory testing in the midst of the trial. So I hope as you think about the things that I shared with you, that the topics that I talked about all facilitate the three primary goals that we have that is support our mission to improve health and improve lives. Thank you again for your time, and I'd like to spend the remainder of the time answering any questions that you have.
Okay, so if you have a question, we actually have two mics, and I'm going to give, our ambassador here has one. We're going to give this ambassador one. Raise your hand, and please wait until you get a microphone. That way we'll capture the question on video.
Hi. So my question is, any advice for someone trying to move up to like a CIO position?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I was very lucky in my career to get to where I am. A lot of it was luck, and a lot of it was working with the right people, because if you work with a great team, you're likely to be successful. I would also say that specific to the CIO role, it's very much a half business, half IT role. And that's a part that I think is an important differentiator for someone trying to go into that particular type of job. It's really, you really have to understand the business enough, because the CIO is primarily responsible for making sure that the company strategy links to the IT strategy. Because if they diverge, then it ends in a bad place. Thank you for the question.
You talked about the EDIs and the integration between your systems and service providers. And you said that you're responsible to develop that. Do you tie that with long-term contracts to make sure that they do not move to other competitors while you spend a lot of time investing in that EDI?
Yes. It's a very interesting point, because if you can imagine, if we can forge the electronic connection to that customer, then it's unlikely that they would shift to another competitive lab if they had to switch to paper, right? So we do evaluate each request to build an EDI connection to see if it's cost justifiable and if it makes sense to do it based on the customer volumes and based on the longevity of the contract we would expect to have with the customer. It causes us to be a very sticky relationship with that customer when we have that kind of integration.
Do you think a single-payer healthcare system would work in this country? It sounds like it would make some of your job simpler or obsolete.
The reimbursement structure in the United States healthcare system is so incredibly complex. I don't know if I know enough to talk to the topic of single payer, but what I would say is there's more lines of code in our billing system than there is in our lab system, which is a little shocking, right? Billing is complex, right? And sometimes illogical, right? So I would think achieving a level of simplicity would be very helpful. I'm not sure if it's single payer versus some other approach, But right now, the policies that are associated with payment for healthcare make it very, very complex for the patient. It's hard for them to know how much they're going to have to pay and why they had to pay or didn't pay for one test versus another test, or any service, not just tests. Like if you go to a hospital, you're just always surprised at what you end up paying and why you did. Thank you.
There are obviously a lot of security and privacy issues here, and we have a lot of people who do research on that. So how in your company do you address the security and privacy issues, particularly during the software development process?
Yeah, this is if there's an area that keeps me up at night, it would be cybersecurity. It is a very difficult environment that requires us to have a level of attention to it that is incredible. If I take the IT budget at LabCorp, by far, by an order of magnitude, the fastest growing part of the budget is in cybersecurity. And we have a chief information security officer who's experienced. He most recently was the chief information security officer at the Mayo Clinic, so he's got a healthcare background, he has an understanding. And he reports to Chuck McAllister, who reports to me, who's sitting in the back. And we spend a lot of time trying to delve into how do we ensure the privacy and the security of that information. You know what, there's laws about it, but even more importantly than the laws about it, it's just the right thing to do. I mean, you're talking about, if it was my mom or sister or brother or family member, I would hate to think that their personal healthcare information would be shared by any healthcare institution without them knowing it. And it just means that there's a heavy, heavy burden. And part of that heavy burden is because the attacks are getting so sophisticated. It's just absolutely incredible. And in the old days of having a virus protection or malware protection, it just, at this point, things are evolving and the attacks are mutating so quickly that you need to have other more effective methods. We're applying a lot of our artificial intelligence to the cybersecurity problem because you can't know if you're going to detect a pattern anymore because it could be something that's brand new or what's called a zero-day attack. So now we're starting to say, can we look for patterns in the communication and in the systems that would allow us to identify it, even if it's an unknown malware, just by the pattern of its functioning or transporting through our different systems. So it is a huge challenge for us, but one that we are certainly investing a tremendous amount of time, effort, and money.
Do your systems have any functionality for sharing patient information among different healthcare providers?
Yes, we do. We do allow a physician to look up a patient's data, if it's their patient, even though that result was generated when they were seeing a different doctor. We feel that that's the right thing to do for the patient. It improves their quality of care. As a separate note, I would say, how many people here use the Apple Health app? If you do, we were the first laboratory to be connected to the Apple Health app. So if you go to it, what you'll see is your LabCorp lab results in the Apple Health app. So we do feel like integrating to share data to support that consumer is critically important.
I had a question also related to the cybersecurity focus. Seeing as you guys are doing both testing and also drug development, do you find that you're facing greater threats to privacy or intellectual property?
We have a number of different threat types. I think the privacy threat is much more on the diagnostic side because, as I had mentioned before, when you go through a clinical trial, it's typically a double-blinded study. So most of the data that you have, you don't know who the patient is. You just have a subject number. So there's less value in the data, in the healthcare data, in the Covance drug development side. I would say on the Covance drug development side, the risks tend to be more to the intellectual property, and there is also some level of risk from sort of the cyber terrorism related to animal testing. Those would probably be the risk areas for us in that business.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi. Last year, companies like Berkshire Hathaway, Amazon, JP Morgan decided to enter the insurance business and provide better healthcare opportunities for their employees. What are your views on such huge giants entering an unknown sector for them? Is it good, bad?
Yeah, it's interesting because at an executive level we have these discussions because in our world the importance, or I shouldn't say importance, the influence of our customer segments are shifting dramatically. So I talked a little bit about the consumer now starting to take more control, so they're having more of an influence. The physicians, because they tend to are being acquired by health systems and hospitals, now the decision maker tends to be the CFO of that health system rather than a lot of the independent physicians that might be accumulating within that health system. So the health systems are becoming very important. The payers are pretty much opening up their networks to both large labs, so they are not the differentiator of where the lab volume is going to go. And the big question mark is this question that you just asked me about the employer. Now, I think it will be a good thing for us, because if you think about laboratory testing, 3% of the healthcare spend is laboratory testing, only 3%. But it influences 85% of the decisions made about your care. So when a doctor is deciding what to do about your care, 85% of the time they're including maybe other stuff, but the lab is included too, right? But it's only 3% of the spend. So you almost wonder if there isn't a view of the employer on how to care for their patients, if the value of the lab testing won't be more. I mean, if you think about it, lab values drive a lot of key decisions for care. I think employers are going to get more involved. Most people think that if you take out your insurance card and it says Aetna or Cigna or Humana or whoever, that's the insurance company that's paying the bill. It's not usually. Because if you're a large company, if you're General Motors, you're not going to pay the uplift for the insurance fee. You're going to go to that provider and you're going to say, I want to sign what's called an ASO contract, administrative services only. I want to be able to use your card. I want to be able to have access to your network, but I don't want you to insure my population. I have tens of thousands of people. I'm willing to take the risk because I'm a big company. Now, if you're a tiny little company, you'd be at risk of someone getting a very expensive disease that could put you out of business, but not General Motors, not LabCorp. I have a United Healthcare card. United Healthcare doesn't pay my bill. LabCorp pays my bill. So the employers are starting to get very interested in how do you improve the quality of care for my employees and how do you lower the cost of care for my employees. So it is a really, really important point and a lot of unknowns surrounding it right now. Can I make one quick comment before we wrap up? So first of all, thank you very, very much for taking the time. Second of all, we hire a lot of people from NC State, some of our best talent. This is a great university, specifically for the type of talent that we need. So I would just say, stick with it. You're going into a great field. You're going to have a lot of fun. This is the kind of job where you do different things, you learn different things. It's fun, it's rewarding. You can move the needle on achieving the mission of LabCorp or whatever company you end up working for. But I think it's important for you to know that as the CIO of an $11 billion company, when I think NC State, I think of a top of the heap when it comes to technology graduates. So thank you very much for letting me speak with you. I really appreciate it.